I am so excited for today's conversation. So, we are going to talk about one question that literally changed my life. And I hope you are ready for me to ask it to you. Because once this box opens, there is no putting it back in. Welcome to Legacy Lounge, the podcast where you'll discover how to lead with purpose and build a legacy that matters. So if you're ready to step into your full potential, show up authentically for yourself and others, and create a lasting impact on the world, you're in the right place. Let's begin. This one question changed how I show up in my leadership, how I show up in my marriage. Sorry, Drew. It even changed with my two little doodles who have opinions about everything. So the question is, do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? Now, before you're like, Brin'na, why not both? Stick with me here because I promise it's worth it. And that was my response to that very question for about 6 years. And it was up until that point that it actually finally clicked what exactly I was being asked and why my answer mattered. So this story starts with one of my earliest mentors, Salam. I talk about him a lot, and I cannot wait to have him featured on this podcast. I was very young in my career, and straight out of college, just like everybody else, I was overly confident in my abilities. You know what I mean? And Salam saw something in me that I needed to learn about myself. One day, after I had just finished proving my point in a meeting, with all the receipts, all the facts, Salam asked me the question, was your intention to be rich or to be right? And I was like, both, obviously, both, always both. And he just smiled and he said, okay, I'll ask you again. And about a year later, he kept his word and he asked. Same answer. And he said, okay, I'll ask you again. This goes on, no joke, for 6 years. And every single time I had given him the exact same answer because that in my mind was the right one. Until finally it clicked. After 6 years of hearing this question and constantly asking it to myself in my own head silently. But here's why it clicked. I was watching a senior leader within the company handle a situation where they were absolutely right. I mean, they had every fact, every receipt, every screenshot, every detail, every single piece of documentation to prove their point. And man, they could have won that argument in about 30 seconds flat or less. But instead of pulling out their receipts, coming in on two wheels right out of the gate, they asked questions. And they listened to the answers. They started to build bridges during the conversation that were probably really hard to sit in that discomfort in. And I watched this person who is technically right choose to be rich in influence and rich in trust and rich in long-term impact. And that's when Salam's question hit me like a ton of bricks. Being rich in leadership is not about money. It's about building relationships that compound over time. It is about creating influence that goes beyond the authority that comes with your title. It's about developing the kind of trust that survives major disagreements. So let me share a recent example from a one-on-one client during our coaching session. Now, don't worry, this leader will remain anonymous, but I was working with this woman, and let's call her Julie. I was working with Julie, who was actually in this exact same situation. And she had every receipt. She had every email, she had every calendar invite ready to go to prove that she was right in the conflict with her colleague. And she could have flat out won the argument, hands down. Still believe that. But here's where it gets really fun, because Julie and I discovered this together, and I got to witness that light bulb moment come on in her mind. Julie had a choice, and she could have easily won this as an argument with her receipts, and she could have totally walked in, dropped the reference list, and turned around and walked right out. Or she could have transformed the moment into something much bigger. So instead of saying, well, here's the proof, I tried to communicate multiple times and you didn't respond, we worked on shifting to her posing more questions and coming in with a supportive mindset, leading with, I value our working relationship. What communication style works best for you? I'm open to adapting how we share information. Do you have a preference on what that looks like moving forward? And the result, not only did they resolve the immediate point of friction, the issue at hand, but they also created a stronger foundation for every future interaction. That is what being rich in leadership looks like. And you know what's really funny is this concept was so transformative that I actually created some framework for other leaders to make this shift to. And it is called, shocker, the Rich versus Right framework. And it includes 20 prompts to help leaders transform conversations. It doesn't make it wrong and bad that your initial reaction is to come and improve your point. Everyone does that. Everyone wants to bring the facts to protect themselves. But as a leader, when you walk into a room and you are navigating a very friction-filled conversation, that's your moment to ask the right questions, to bridge the relationship, and to learn from exactly who the friction is with. It's such a gift. So I want to share a couple of my favorite examples, because in the Rich versus Right framework that I have created, there's over 20 questions that really help put this into perspective to use in everyday conversation. And guess what? It's not just for your conversations at work. It's also for the ones that happen inside the four walls of your house. So I'm going to share a couple of my favorite examples. Instead of saying, well, that's not what we agreed to, which, let's be honest, we have all wanted to say, you could try saying, help me understand how this aligns with our original goals. I might be missing something. Total different tone. Total different way of the receiver hearing what you're asking. And guess what? The answer will likely lead to some sort of takeaway lesson we can learn, but it also doesn't force people to get defensive and then fuel the fire of the friction that's already there. Or instead of saying, No, 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 no. You're not following the process. You could easily shift that to, hey, I notice we're taking a different approach here. What other insights led to making this kind of a shift? How cool would that kind of conversation be? Do you see what's happening here, though? We're not avoiding the hard conversation. We are actually letting go of the standards that we think we have to have. We're just choosing how we show up in the moment of friction in order to proceed through the hard conversation. And here is the thing about choosing to be rich instead of choosing to be right, and why it matters. It's not just about being nice. It's about being strategic. And it's about playing the long game in and through your leadership. Think about it. Every challenging conversation is actually an opportunity. It's a great opportunity. And it's an opportunity to either prove your point or to build your influence. You can win an argument, or you can win trust that compounds over time. So here's what I want you to do. Before your next challenging conversation, just think of this question. Think of my voice asking you this right now. Do I want to be rich or do I want to be right? And then instead of pulling out the receipts, opening up your photo album to find the screenshots, try one of these approaches in the framework. Start small. Maybe it's turning "that's not how we do things" into "I'm curious what opportunities you see that we could have in a new approach. Could you walk me through what you're thinking?" It could change the dynamic of the relationship entirely. And if you're ready to take this work even a step deeper, I've created a resource, like I mentioned, with over 20 leadership conversation transformation prompts. They are the most common points of friction with the beginning statement and an example of how that can be flipped into a question that supports the outcome and the relationship. The rich versus right framework. It's designed to help you build influence while having alignment and to have more success without unnecessary friction. Remember that great leaders, they know how to be both rich and right, but they lead with rich in relationship in order to ultimately achieve right. This is Brin'na. Thank you for listening. Now go build your leadership wealth. And Drew, if you're listening to this, yeah, this applies to our discussions about the dogs too. That's it for this episode of Legacy Lounge. Thanks for listening. And until next time, I'm your host, Brin'na, encouraging you to lead with purpose. Your legacy depends on it. That's it for this episode of Legacy Lounge, a podcast dedicated to empowering you to lead with purpose. Remember, leadership begins with you. When you're connected to your values, strengths, and authentic self, you show up powerfully for your team, businesses, and everyone you lead. To authentically lead others, you must first lead yourself. I challenge you to consider, how are you investing in your personal growth to create a legacy that you envision? Thank you for joining me in the Legacy Lounge. If this episode sparked any thoughts or inspired action, I'd love to hear from you. I'm your host, Brin'na Rollins-Williams. Connect with me on LinkedIn or other socials, and let's continue the conversation. Remember, your legacy is built one intentional step at a time.